This is House Planning Help episode 110. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you want to self-build or retrofit. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century. My personal goal is to create an energy-efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. Coming up in this session, I'm going to be reviewing where I am in my own self-build process and having a look at why. So this could be a shorter episode than normal because it's just me on my own, but I've been doing this podcast for 3.5 years, nearly 3.5 years. And 2016 was the year that I said I was going to complete my house build. Yeah, well, I'm nowhere near achieving that. It doesn't take a genius to discover. And so it's time yet again to look at why things are happening as they are, and I want to try harder. I'm not going to give up. I know it's getting increasingly unlikely. I'd just like to have something to show for all this effort, for all of this knowledge that I've tried to find out and then implement. And it can be quite frustrating. So I feel that I'm probably not on my own when I share some of this. It's also going to mean a few changes to the podcast. When I set out on this, it was very much exploring what we should be building in the 21st century. It's what I've said every time as I've started up the podcast. This will always be central to the podcast, staying close to innovation and the people that drive standards forwards. However, I've done enough of these now to think that there really is a common sense route. Or perhaps it's me just choosing my way and saying, oh, look, I've collected my thoughts here. For example, let's go through a few of these actually. The Passive House Standard is a standard that we've talked about a number of times on this podcast. And to me, it just seems logical that that's the way that all buildings will go in the future. There are so many benefits attached to it and very few drawbacks. Okay, just by building a passive house, it doesn't mean that your house is going to be perfect. You could build too big. You might use materials that are going to pollute the environment, or you could have made wiser choices. Perhaps your building will lack architectural flair, or the interior layout will be designed poorly. I don't know. The list will go on like that. It does, though, lead to a higher quality of building. So you will get the comfort, you'll get the low heating bills, the energy efficiency, the air quality. These are just a few things. Some people find them very peaceful because of that thick insulation and the good windows and so forth. And there are other benefits that I'm not going to mention. Let's take another tack here for a moment. Co-housing is something that has also really impressed me. It's not just about building the house, because that house will reside somewhere and it is likely to be in a community. And when I've visited places like Lilac and also Lancaster co-housing, it's just easy to see that there's a lot of sense in this too. Particularly if we face a future with bigger problems, we're going to want to share those problems or try and address it as a collective rather than on our own. So perhaps that is the place to be that we'd want to be, or I see it increasing that we're going to have more co-housing developments. I think the key thing about it really is that sharing, isn't it? It's sharing everything, or just allowing you to do what you're good at, contributing that to the community, and then sharing facilities, whether that situation of having 30 hammers, you've got 30 houses, everyone has a toolbox. It's probably a toolbox that doesn't really have enough useful tools in, and you're always having to go out and buy another one. Well, co-housing is great because it just means that you can have one well-equipped tool shed and probably 2 or 3 people who are experts and know how to use all those tools, whereas I would bash my thumbs as I try and put up a shelf or whatever it might be. You know what I'm saying here. So shared meals, childcare, if you need to nip out, your family, your kids are going to be in a safe place, and lots of other benefits here as well. Co-housing to me ticks the community box, and there are various ways you can go about it. There's this other aspect that I don't even really know how to categorise it, but it seems that when we're building new houses and new developments, they should all be with an eye to how can we get people walking or cycling? How can we have these hubs where the majority of things that we do not involve a car? And that, as we go forwards, would seem to make sense unless you're in a climate where it's boiling hot outside or absolutely freezing where you just can't step out of the door. Those sorts of common sense things, I think, are the main things in development as I see it from my research. as to what we should be doing. There are bigger issues which I'm going to touch on. This is a slight tangent here, but it does lead on to this. For me, population is, again, so crucial. Our population is just growing and growing and growing on this planet, and a few times now we've seen the borders of different countries, they sort of blur with globalization. I think this naturally comes. People understand what we're in different parts of the world and they want a piece of that action, so they risk everything they possibly got to move to a different part of the world. And a lot of countries have a lot of people in, even Western countries have a lot of people in, but I think this flow of people is going to be a lot more radical in the future. And I wish, as a world, we could address this. I know it's an unpleasant subject. No one likes talking about population unless we're planning to just send people up to the moon to live there. So sorry if this has got a bit random. It's the way it's going to go. Other issues for the future that I see, something's got to give here, is consumerism. It's rampant consumerism. We've just gone through Christmas at the time of recording of this podcast, and I've been given some gifts. I'm grateful for them. Sometimes I just think, I'd much rather not have these extra bits of plastic or whatever it might be. Occasionally I feel this when other members of the family want to go and do a holiday, or yes, it's great, or friends, but there's a side of me that would like to stick at home or try and reduce that travel, or make it one long trip where you go for 6 months and you just live somewhere abroad. And I think that as time goes on, more and more of these things will become important. And that's where I'm finishing up here, is just this sustainable economy. I see it time and again, thinking this is just going to have to develop. It already is underway, like all of these things, like climate change. They're all happening at the moment. We've just had, I think, one of the mildest years ever in the UK. And you could say, yes, coincidence, but you could also say this is exactly what we're expecting from climate change. So in terms of sustainable economy, just trying to do what we can as individuals. Each of us has that power to be able to go out and do something. You invest your money as it stands in companies, in people, just to try and do it more wisely when you can. Sometimes you just have so little money, your choices are limited. But as we get more money, then we should be so careful about how we're making those choices. And I think that's what's going to come. This sustainable economy will grow and grow. If you're completely confused this far, that's fine. Just ignore my ramblings. It does impact on the podcast in my mind. Maybe you don't connect that quite so easily. And I think what I'm trying to say here is that a lot of the questions when I started this podcast and set out to find out what houses we should be building in the 21st century, I feel that, okay, we don't know perfectly what we should be building, but we know a pretty good amount. And that's why I'm wondering, does it not make sense to turn our attentions into why is it not happening? Why are we not going down this route? What is so difficult? A few times we've talked about the mass developer housing, volume house builders. It seems that it's the money, isn't it? The money they're chasing, that the product is just of little consequence, really. Maybe standards might improve if the governments have been good in your specific country. In the UK, they certainly haven't, and they've just taken out things like the Code for Sustainable Homes, and the building regulations don't seem to be coming up to meet that or to pick up where it left off. And then there are investors who play a role in this, and I know as an investor, I see that, again, there's just no motivation. Why would you want a decent quality building when really you're interested in a process happening? You need to be able to rent out that building. So until the people coming to rent those buildings say, oh, I don't want this, in other words, they've got some choice, then the lowest common denominator, whatever gets out and gets rented, will get the money back in. So investors are also contributing to this. And so I think that if more of us built our own houses, more of you managed to fulfill your dreams and got that happening, then the markets for some of these other things would naturally shrink, which has got to be really, really positive. And that's one of the reasons for this, or these changes that are coming up, is that I think that this will make a lot of sense. So I'm going to do no more podcasts on retrofitting. I can hear the people saying, you can't do this. Retrofitting's so important. And it is important. It's a huge issue. I'm sure at some point I'm going to come back to it. This is just for now. I need to focus. And I know that retrofitting will be that challenge of a generation. Until I've built my house, though, until I've got past this step, and I see it as the simplest problem to fix in terms of the new housing. If we all decided tomorrow we would build quality houses, then that would mean that the retrofitting pool would just shrink and shrink and shrink until it was no longer something that people would want to talk about. So there is a slight wisdom in trying to just concentrate on new build for now. And it's the same focus that I'm trying to apply for the next thing, which is I'm going to stick to the UK. And I found this difficult. There have been a number of times during the podcast where I've thought people are listening from any area around the world, that they've got access to the internet. They can download the podcast, they can access the website. So it makes sense to talk about those parts of architecture, or specifically of green architecture, that interest people and that, roughly speaking, can be translated across borders. Because I'm sure a number of times on this podcast, if you're listening in the States or in Australia, or we've had a guest from America and you're listening in the UK, certain things, they just don't make sense to you, or perhaps you're learning about it. But that's just what happens when you interview a person from a certain country. So I'm going to focus it on the UK because, one, this is where I'm based, and it's the easiest source of finding people who are building well, because I know through first-hand contacts and going out there and seeing it, and I suppose that's where a lot of the podcasts have come from anyway. So it's maybe not such a big change. Also, setting up the hub, which was my big challenge, my big thing that I wanted to achieve last year, along with buying a plot of land. That one didn't happen. I need to start in one country. It had to go that way. There was no other way of starting to build it out. And so as I've done that, then the podcast almost seems like it doesn't match the hub. And so I've been mulling it over. What can I do? What can I do? And I just thought that this is, again, a decision that I have to make for now. Focus on the UK market. It's not saying that my long-term goal isn't actually to be able to bring resources to other countries. It's pointless. It's never going to happen unless I can make it a success in the UK first. And part of that success is actually me getting on with my house build. And I've talked about it enough. I set this date into the future. So I hope you understand that some of the episodes that are coming up, they may not be relevant to you. You might want to switch them off. I get it, and I apologise for that. It doesn't mean that we can't interview experts from other countries. It just has to fit into what we're doing. And that brings me to my final point of where we're going. I want to focus on the roadblocks, the things that are stopping people from building, that are keeping, in the UK anyway, this self-build market very, very niche. How can we try and break through some of those? For example, key point here, I've been searching for a plot of land for a year and a half. It may well be that I'm doing something wrong and I'm foolish, and that will be discovered further down the line. It's quite possible that that might happen. However, I have a sneaky suspicion that if I'm experiencing it, then probably you are too, or other people are experiencing it, and it is worthwhile us trying to get to grips with this in a much bigger way. So I would like to, as you may have guessed, speed up the getting the land bit. And then there are other elements which I've come across time and again when doing this podcast. Sometimes I think, oh, we can talk about that. And other times I thought, oh no, well, it's not going to apply across different borders. So one of them is definitely finance. How do we make all this affordable so that anyone can do it? Not just me, not just you, but anyone will be able to go and build a house and make it happen. Doesn't matter if they're very, very wealthy or if actually they haven't got great means. So that is another route to explore. And we're going to have more on this in the future. In the UK as well, planning is a big issue. And I don't get it at all. It's not something, because I've kept it out of the podcast, I don't really even understand it. So these are areas that we're going to dig into in a big way. These challenges that self-builders face. Some of them are about finding a quality team, someone that they know they can put their faith in. So if, like me, I don't want to be going around and doing all the jobs, if I can really, really help it, unless money gets tight, and I have to do it, I just want to put my faith in a good team. So we're going to be doing quite a bit on building up that dream team and finding out what they all do. And then something that has been useful the whole way along, as far as I'm concerned, and my learning has been those case studies. We'll have more of those. We might just go a bit more focused on each case study. So instead of going through a whole house build and perhaps hearing a lot of the same things, maybe we'll just look at one element of that house build. It's not to say we can't come back to that house in the future, just one side of it and really knuckle down onto that. So this all comes at a time when I'm facing new pressures as well, because I'm at a life stage. I've got a son now who's 18 months old, and we're looking to have another child at some point in the future. Now, this house that I'm in at the moment has 2 bedrooms. I'm standing in one of them recording this, doubles up as my office. And to my right, I have my son's cot, which probably he won't be using for much longer. So he'll be able to escape and fiddle with all my equipment. This house is not going to do for much longer. I can keep it going for a while, I think. And I was always wanting to do that, to just really put the pressure on and find this. When I set up my goal of building a house before I turned 40, I thought that by setting a deadline, it would make things happen. Because that's often an important point of creating a goal, is that you do what you can and you focus your mind in on that. And so as I get closer and closer, I've got 8 months now to make this happen. I'm a realist. It's probably not going to happen. But I also think I've got a fighting chance. I know people who are good at what they do in this country who probably would help me just for something fun to see if we can make it happen by August 2016. It's not impossible yet, as far as I'm concerned. So the recap goes like this, that I'm going to focus on self-build only for the next while. And the same applies. I'm going to focus on the UK, and we're going to focus on the core challenges of building houses. Nothing else. It's a focus. And then if you're still with me after all of this, probably what's in the hub will interest you and it will make sense. Just before we move on and I tell you about the hub and a couple of other things, if you want to comment on this or leave feedback, please be honest. Please do it in the show notes. houseplanninghelp.com/110, or just tap me up on Twitter at Ben Adam Smith and I'll have a chat with you there. So in the show notes, actually, just while I mentioned that URL, we've got a new About video. And if you're someone, if this is the first time you've ever listened to this podcast, it's probably going to make very little sense at all. But you can go back and see where I started out, and it takes you all the way through, just in a couple of minutes, telling the story of House Planning Help and my house build and why things haven't gone exactly to plan this far. So we'll embed that in the show notes, or just head to the About page. Show notes URL one more time, houseplanninghelp.com/110. So the hub, I just wanted to update you on what had happened last month. What we did was we've added a new chapter to the Long Barrow Passive House story. Alex Baines is a self-builder who has been building all of last year, and he's using insulated concrete forms, but we haven't got that far yet. In fact, we're still in the foundations, and in this episode, we find out why they went for a raft foundation. Look at some of the planning that was involved, because they really wanted or had to address heave in this situation. So we'll find out what is heave and how did they address it and some of the steps that were taken. The other thing that Alex was concerned about, he didn't want his insulation underneath the house to get wet. Well, understandably. So how do they go about doing that? And I think that this is really useful. It's video case studies. We're trying to add one of these episodes every month, about 5 minutes long. It just shows you some of these things. You could get it by walking around a building site. Not all of us have access to a building site, and we might upset the self-builder if we kept on going back to their site. And we probably wouldn't, because self-builders always seem to be so open and say, yeah, come and have a look, come and see what I'm up to. So we'll be looking at the choices, because you don't always go down one route. There are many different ways that you can achieve the same outcome. So we'll find out why Alex has made these particular choices. And then, as ever, with all of this, we're just trying to make it as easy to understand as possible, because I want to be able to watch things like this and go, oh yeah, I get it, and have learnt something. We've also got a new module in there on planning permission. That's one of the topics that we're really wanting to dig into this year on the podcast. So there's an introduction. We also have an interview with Phil Skill, who's a chief planner. If you ever saw the TV show in the UK called The Planners, he was in that. very interesting guy, and he wants to help people out there. From my chats with him, we'll probably bring him onto the podcast in the coming weeks. And we got a case study of someone who applied for planning permission and got it. That's with Kingsley Barraclough, and we'll see what happened on his new build. houseplanninghelp.com/hub. Also, if you become a Hub member, you'll get an opportunity to network with other self-builders. We've got a Facebook group as well, because we worked out that this is probably the easiest way to interact. And it's £45 for the whole year, which is an absolute bargain. It's definitely not staying like this. It's only because it's early days and we're building it up. And to be quite honest, it's a little rough around the edges as we go forwards, but at some point, there will be a turning point where we'll think, we're getting happy with this, and then the price will go up. So that's everything that I've got for this session. Don't worry, we flick back to normal interview format next time. I just felt this was a good point to update you because, of course, we've gone into 2016, and I would absolutely love that if we got to August and I had completed my house. That would just be brilliant. I'm probably living in a dream world here, but we will try. I'm going to really try this year. And that's the other thing, that the podcast, in some ways, if I can make it work, I want to try and show you how I'm trying to drive my project forwards, because you might think that I'm not doing anything in my spare time. Or maybe if I start doing podcast episodes about how much time I'm spending on Rightmove looking at different properties, you'll get in touch and you'll say, Ben, this isn't the best way to do this. Why don't you go and do that instead? So thanks for listening. I'll catch up with you next time. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.